Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, and a very big welcome to our webinar today. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting this event. It's going to be a really lively discussion and educational piece for everybody. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to our webinar host. That is Dr. Shoona Vincent. He'll introduce himself and the rest of the panel, and we'll get started today. Thank you, Shoona.
Thank you very much, Claire. Hi, everybody. Shoona Vincent. I've been in the industry coming up to 37 years in clinical research, both for large and small biotechs. I've been involved in CNS research for many, many years. Since being at Mac, I've been leading the psychedelic programs that we get involved in. I'm looking forward to a very good interactive discussion and debate. Bev, do you want to say hello?
Yes, hello everyone. Nice to be speaking to you all. My name's Bev Doyle. I've got 40 years now or more probably as a registered nurse. Of the last 15 years, I've been working in clinical research here at Mac. Mostly working as a clinical rating specialist in our CNS disorders, but also of the last few years, I'd say 5-6 years, as we've embarked on psychedelic research, I have been heading up the facilitator program as a mentor and trainer, and also being very much active in that role.
Kate, or Katie.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm a clinical research scientist. Background is psychology and neuroscience. I've operationally led several psychedelic studies now. I'm also a trainer in setting. I'm also a psychedelic-assisted therapist and a clinical reader.
Thank you very much. That's the introduction, folks. So let's move to the next slide, please. So before we delve into can the psychedelics transition into general practice? And that's a debate that I've been having with many people. How do we move these psychedelics into general practice? At Mac, we've done quite a lot of programs since 2018. We're now on our 15th study with psychedelics and dissociated drugs. We first started off with ibogaine, DMT, psilocybin, and the deuterated analogs of psilocybin, IV psilocin, the metabolite of psilocin, MDMA, including the R version, the S, and the racemic mixture, LSD, and ketamine. We'll talk a little bit about ketamine, whether it's truly a psychedelic or not. In terms of our clinical trials achievement, and the focus is not about clinical trials, it's about how we transition from clinical trials into general practice. We dosed the first ibogaine in a clinical environment. We looked at escalating doses up to 50 milligrams of psilocybin. We've done food effect crossover, where we've dosed subjects after the second dose, after the second week. That was interesting. We'll talk about that as well. And also the deuterated DMT compounds as well, whether they're IV or intramuscular, and also looking at multiple dose of RMDMA. So we have, since 2018, built a psychedelic infrastructure. We'll talk about setting. That's what Katie talks about as well. We'll look at staff, psychedelics, kind of trained staff, whether it's psychiatrists, therapists, psychotherapists, etc. We'll look at that as well. And we've also kind of give you our experience in all of these psychedelics that we've encountered, whether they're healthy volunteers or patients. Next slide, please. So in terms of who we've seen and who we treated in a clinical trial setting, these have been healthy volunteers, male and female. They're either naive to the psychedelic or they've had experience in the past. We can discuss what that experience is. We've looked at major depressive disorders, treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety, and social anxiety disorders as well. So we've got pretty good experience in healthy as well as different disease areas. And we'll talk about personalized protocols later on. Next slide, please. So in terms of the psychedelic facilities, setting is going to become a big discussion point, which Katie will take on. we had to rearrange our clinics to have that so-called set and setting. And the question I have later on is, do we need to replicate that set and setting in kind of in the generalized kind of practice as well? Obviously, the psychedelics are Schedule 1 or Class A, depending if you're in the US. We've got to have the appropriate licenses as well to handle these drugs, to hold, to manipulate, and to dose as well. That takes a bit of time as well. And again, the question is, do we need to relook at scheduling these drugs in the generalized practice? And also in terms of the regulatory and ethical considerations, there are challenges there, and there are also operational challenges as well. So it's developing that set and setting where Katie and Bev will talk about. We have psychiatrists and therapists that are certified who can manage them through their experiences throughout the program. And we can look at good experiences and challenging experience as well when it comes to our kind of discussion. Next slide, please. So the infrastructure we had to develop very quickly. We have developed a number of our sites, and we have 10 sites in the UK. We've converted them into what we call psychedelic suites or psychedelic research. And one of the photographs you see there is a camera. As part of our SOPs, we record, we capture the event or the experience in a recording. And that is purely for safeguarding. And that's something we can discuss, if it moves into general practice. Do we need these type of infrastructures in place as well? So next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little about that set and setting. That's very important. Do we need the set to be right? Do we need the setting to be right for individuals to have their psychedelic experience? And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. The question I have, and the question that I've always been debating, is, can we translate, what we see in the clinic, the lovely set and setting, into everyday kind of practice? And that's something I'm looking forward to having a discussion as well. Next slide, please. So psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, I put a hope or dilemma. Remember, the regulatory bodies approve drug, they don't approve psychotherapy. So that's a challenge that we've got. When we work with a lot of sponsors, they use different terminologies, therapist, attendants, dose session monitoring, facilitators. And I'm sure Bev and Katie will take you through those definitions. But I think the underlying view is that, we need to make sure the patients are safe and they're looked after and they're managed through their journey as well. So with regards to all the protocols we've seen a very similar type of flow. There's obviously the preparation that needs to happen. And I'm not going to read all the bullet points, the preparation that needs to happen, making the patient feel safe, the participant feel safe, making sure that it's able to relax and enjoy the experience. Then there's the psychedelic session itself. What happens in the room when we dose the subject. We want them to be optimal in terms of their physical and their mental safety as well. That's very important. And then it's the integration. The integration is very important. When can they be discharged from the clinic? Who makes that decision? And what do we see in terms of, their ability to be discharged? And do we discharge them, or do we keep them in the clinic because we're not happy with where they are in terms of coming back to baseline? And that's something we'll discuss as well. So the integration session is very important. And the question I have is, can that be translated into everyday practice? Next slide, please. So current medical use of psychedelics. Now, I'm sure you know that Johnson & Johnson had the esketamine, ketamine, that was approved, a nasal spray for major depressive disorders. Okay, and then they decided then to move into treatment-resistant depression, and then they moved into major depressive disorders that have acute suicidal ideation. So the question I have is, is esketamine a real psychedelic, or is it slightly different? But it all depends on your definition of a psychedelic. I personally would not classify ketamine or esketamine as a real, true classical psychedelic. But that's something we can discuss later on. So there is a psychedelic, if you want to call it that, available, and the regulatory bodies and the funding bodies have approved that. Has it been used widely? That's a debate that we'll have as well. Next slide, please. So what will continue with the current use of psychedelics? You know, I'm sure everybody knows Lycos, aka MAPS, failed in their submission with the FDA. I'm not going to go into the reasons why, but I've just highlighted it there. You know, it's about positive results. You know, is there adverse events? We can talk about the cardiovascular and adverse events. You know, durability is a funny word, and that's something a lot of the clinics and the medics use. You know, how durable is the dose? Does one dose fit? And that's something Bev will talk about in terms of the durability of the dose. You know, when should the next dose be, etc. And then, of course, the FDA did say, look, there are higher rates of people on MDMA that you know, had a high pre-screen failure rate, etc. Things like that. So there's lots to learn from the Lycos situation. I think lots of people have learned, particularly the psychedelic companies that are moving into phase 3. And I'm sure you're aware that I think they've already released it. They've released a complete response letter, the FDA, and they've given Lycos a kind of areas to address, and that is demonstrating this you know, one dose durability effect. We're not going to talk about functional unblinding because that's a topic in itself. All of these clinical trials have an inherent problem with functional unblinding, but there are ways around dealing with functional unblinding as well. And then obviously the safety aspects of MDMA. You know, what do we do? Have they got abuse liability? Are the cardiovascular events that happen, etc.? That's something you know, the companies need to focus on. But that's not what we're here to kind of talk about. So, you know, people are moving towards getting regulatory approval for these drugs to be used. Next slide, please. What is interesting, and I'm keeping an eye on this, is that, you know, Australia, recently New Zealand have basically said, yeah, sure, you know, psychedelics can be prescribed, but only by a specialist, whether it's psilocybin and MDMA, or on a named patient kind of approval, until there's the regulatory approval. So that's interesting to see as well. Canada and Switzerland also allow compassionate use of psilocybin. Interestingly, recently Germany also allowed named patient supplies of the psilocybin. I mean, it's a herbal, it's a botanical psilocybin candidate. But what's interesting here is that there is a view by the regulatory bodies and expert bodies that, you know, psychedelics do have a place in managing, you know, the mental health problems that we have. And what's interesting for me about the German, and we'll talk about this later, is there are only 2 clinics that are allowed to prescribe these psychedelics or psilocybin. So, and again, one of the questions will be, should all clinics prescribe, or should there be, you know, certain expertise clinics that you're going to go for as well? But what I'm trying to say here, it's good news. You know, there is a acceptance of psychedelics with our regulatory bodies. Next slide, please. There are obviously companies that I'm keeping an eye out. Although the FDA decisions or the EMEA or the MHRA haven't really approved any drug yet, there are lots of companies working towards getting that approval. Compass, as you know, their oral psilocybin for treatment resistant is heading towards the FDA. Usona is also heading towards the FDA. Awaken Life Sciences using their ketamine for alcoholic disorder, and obviously MindMed with the LSD for their generalized anxiety. I'm sure all of these companies have reviewed the negativity that was surrounding the Lycos kind of rejection. I'm sure they're learning from that. And just to let you know, Lycos has now changed its name to Resilient Pharmaceuticals, and I hope they do learn from the findings from the FDA. So you can see there are large companies aiming for getting approval of these drugs. Next slide, please. So for me, there are 3 key elements, and I'll stop in a moment. There are 3 key elements. The key elements are Robust clinical evidence, that's obviously what we do. We need robust clinical evidence. How do we reduce the patient bias? How do we reduce the functional unblinding? That's something we can discuss next time. But that's something inherent in the way we design. But there are ways, and there are structures, and there are systems that we can use to reduce that. Obviously, the regulatory bodies want effective data. Are they saying, look, it's just the drug, or is it a combination of the drug and psychotherapy? The FDA were very clear, and I'm sure the EMA, etc., they do not kind of approve psychotherapy. It's the drug that they approve, and that's a hurdle we need to look at. And the question that I have, and we'll broaden that out now, is how do we integrate psychedelics into the healthcare system, into general practice? And that's a debate that we can have. Next slide, please. So we have to look at the ethical and practical considerations. Psychedelics are not part of general practice. They are tightly controlled. They're limited to specialist clinics. Anything outside of that for clinical trials is going to be a challenge. And that's something I'd like to kind of discuss with my colleagues, Bev and Kate, as well. How do we translate what we've learned from our clinical trials into everyday practice? And the other question that I have is, does everybody get the psychedelics? Or is it limited to only a certain number of people? Does psychotherapy, psychedelic-assisted therapy, play an important role as well? We can discuss that as well in the coming up discussions. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That gives you a bit of background on, who we are, what we've done, and the questions that I sit here thinking, scratching my head, thinking, how do we move these drugs into mainstream use? What we're going to look at, we're going to open up now the debate here, is, the consideration for Bev and Katie. These are the types of questions that I have, that we came about, and it's something we'd like to open the discussion. So I'll start off with the first question to Katie. Katie, you know what we've done. I've given you a background. Is set and setting important, or is it not important? Why do you think it's important? I'll kind of hand over to you now, Katie.
Thanks, Shoona. Great question as well. I think I'd first like to start off with a quote from Rick Strassman, who wrote the book The Spirit Molecule. Depending upon set and setting, the same drug at the same dose can have vastly different responses in the same individual. I think it's a really powerful quote. Just a bit of background, we'll give a bit of definition. If you look at set, we'll look at set refers to a participant's mindset, because that can include a participant's thoughts, participant's emotions, participants' expectations, their personality, their fears, their beliefs, general preparation to dose. Then we'll look at the setting. Setting is not only the physical, but also the social environment that the participant is in. Not only the dosing environment where the participant will be dosing, but also their surrounding areas. This will include the temperature, the lighting, the furnishings, and also the behaviour of staff and how they interact with participants. So as we know in research, participants' mindset, preparation to dose, as well as their physical and social environment, can both majorly affect how a participant responds to a psychedelic drug. So then we know we've got to create a safe environment, a supportive environment, minimal distractions, minimal stimulation. We've learned a lot over the years. I think both of you will agree with that. But we've got to think, how do we manage set and setting in real world healthcare? And this is where we bring in standardization. This is standardization of training, standardization of resources. So everyone's following the same principles, the same guidelines. First of all, set and setting should be standardized for all psychedelic compounds. One, standardized set and setting training, whether it's working with DMT, whether it's working with psilocybin, whether it's working with the likes of LSD. Then we have to think standardization across all boards of all roles and responsibilities. It's not only the likes of psychedelic-assisted therapists that should be trained in set and setting, it's all staff who come into contact with participants. As we know, we train our staff right from recruitment right through to our psychedelic-assisted therapists, study coordinators and CTAs. But again, it comes into, we need to train our staff who are going to be in the real world healthcare setting. So we talk about how we're going to train these staff members, standardization of certification, one that staff will be trained. standardization of making sure our room is equipped not only for dosing, but our pre and post dose procedures. I think we've got to look into how we're going to do that as well. So if we look from a clinic perspective, in our dosing rooms, we have non-clinical areas where it's still part of clinic procedures, but we understand that we've got those soft furnishings, we've got our minimal disruptions. So again, it's trying to standardize that in the healthcare profession. And we've got to think of the standardization in regards to where are we going to be dosing these patients? Is it going to be in a hospital? Is it going to be specific treatment centres? Again, all of this, however, will depend on the license and regulation after approvals. But again, we go back to this standardization of setting. But just to follow back to that question, it is highly important, and we need to keep the same principles that we're following in research and follow them through to the real world healthcare.
Yeah. Katie, I'm going to bring in Bevan in a minute. I've just got another thing. How feasible do you reckon it is that we can replicate the setting in everyday practice? You know, that's my worry, because, you know, are we going to have now specialist units, specialists like Germany have got 2 specialist units? Are we then looking at, you know, having specialist units that can only treat kind of people with psychedelics because they've got the setting, or could it be done in a healthcare unit? So just a couple of comments on that.
Yeah, I think we can bring it into healthcare. I think we can bring it into the likes of NHS. I think we can bring it into hospitalizations. When we talk about standardization of training, it's we bring the standardization of training, and then that's how we will bring it into these hospitals. We've changed our clinical settings and been able to turn them into centres of excellence for psychedelics. I believe we're going to be able to do that for the likes of the NHS and private healthcare settings.
Bev, do you want to kind of comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Katie. In terms of setting, certainly setting is something that can easily be replicated. You know, all you really need is a comfortable room, as long as it meets the standards that Katie's described. It's not actually a difficult thing to create, so I can't see it being a problem to, you know, replicate that in a hospital setting or a clinic setting. And one of the things I've noticed lately is the government's been talking a lot about neighborhood healthcare, like setting up local communities. And I actually think this will, you know, this type of treatment would be well placed in places like that, where they just really need a quiet place, a comfortable room. It's easy to replicate. And I think that could be possibly the way forward without putting too much strain on our hospital settings.
Yeah. There is a view, and I'm going to challenge you on this. There is a view that, Shoona, look, you know, these people come in, they get the drug, they're monitored, and they go away. You know, that's the ideal situation. You know, but you're right. I mean, that they have this challenging experience as well. So, you know, I'm still unsure, and this is just me personally speaking. You know, and the people listening, you know, these are our opinions. You know, we're not regulatory experts or payers, etc. You know, I met somebody from a hospital who was getting involved in trials. He goes, Shoona, it's difficult for me to have a room, to have a setting in the university or the hospital. It's difficult for me to have that space. So you may want to kind of comment on that. But and again, there was another comment I got from one of the psychiatrists who said, look, it doesn't really matter about the setting. It can be just a comfortable room. As long as they feel safe and they feel secure, they can have their experience there. What do you say to that, Bev and Kate?
I personally think that setting is vital. It's very important, but I agree with you. I think the challenge we're going to have is resources, is space, and is time. That is going to have to be something we consider. Do I think we'll still be able to replicate it? Yes, but I agree with you. I do think it will be challenging, but I believe it's something we'll be able to still put into practice.
Any comments before we move to
again, coming back to my comment earlier, I actually don't think these settings need to be in hospital settings. I think that it's perfectly feasible to sort of, you know, your local health centre, your GP practice. I think that could be somewhere that you could, you know, easily set up something like this. So I don't think that should be a problem particularly. I think if it is a problem, it's a small one that's easily overcome.
I agree. I think it saves on hospital resources as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And also we have to think about the impact this may potentially have on the NHS. This is a big thing for me. Like if we can prove that these drugs actually help, certainly in, say, for example, depression causes such a drastic antidepressant effect, how much resources is that going to save on the hospital settings overall when people are in less crisis and they're not turning up at GP practices for antidepressants repeatedly, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I do think the impact that they could have is quite profound.
Let me just play the little devil's advocate here as well. I think, Katie, you mentioned, setting is very important to help with their experience. I think that's very important kind of comment there. But not everybody's going to have the same standardization of setting as well. So something we kind of look at. Can we replicate what we do in clinical trials in general practice? Maybe, possibly. Do we really need, the salt lamp and the plants and the pictures, that we put in our room and the cozy rug, etc.? What's your thoughts on that?
Maybe not as specific as a salt lamp, even though I think we've all got them. But in regards to a peaceful environment, if you think peaceful environment, a natural environment, low stimulation and low distraction, minimal, I'll say the word minimal until low, then everything else kind of works with it. But as long as you've got, I think, those four, I think you're on the right track.
Agreed.
Understood. Okay, I'm just going to have one more question before we move on. In terms of the setting, and we'll talk about this later on, and I might be jumping the gun, is it manned by psychiatrists? Is it manned by physicians? Are these managed by nurses? How will the setting be manned, and who's responsible for that?
I think, for instance, I'm a setting trainer. I'm not a physician, and I am not a medical or psychiatrist. However, I have a lot of experience in various psychedelic compounds. I have a lot of experience in psychedelic-assisted therapy. So I think the likes of healthcare professionals with the experience of psychedelic dosing sessions, and then you go back to the standardization of training to be a setting trainer.
Understand. Before and again, we'll move on to the next question, Bev. And this is a question it's going to challenge me, and I'm sure it's challenging other people. Do we need a different setting for the psychedelics? I know you said standardization, Katie, but there is a view that people on DMT have a different reaction to people on psilocybin, etc., things like that.
Yeah, like we said, I think we still keep it standardized. So there's a standardization of setting. We understand different psychedelic compounds have various different effects. That could be a separate training. We understand the likes of a DMT experience is vastly different to LSD. Setting is how you, one, preparation to dose for set, and then setting is your environment. We can provide that training, then separately look at the effects that the psychedelic compounds may bring up.
Thank you. It would be great to have questions from the audience about their view on setting. Let's move on to the second question, or the second consideration, and this is going to be quite an interesting debate here, Bev. And I'll focus on you. Is what is psychedelic assisted therapy? Who can deliver it, and do we need it?
Yes, big debate, isn't it? It's a very hot topic, this one. And I suppose today, mostly I'm going to speak about my own personal opinions, just based on our own experience to date. In the simplest terms, of course, what is a psychedelic assisted therapist? Well, it's kind of an umbrella term that, and we've adopted that as the overall term that we're using, and certainly in this presentation. But as Shoona mentioned earlier, they can be called a number of different things. Like we've had from, I've seen trip sitters to, facilitators, attendants, dose session monitors. But basically, in a nutshell, they are somebody who is trained and certified and capable of preparing a patient for a psychedelic experience, supporting them throughout, and then allowing them to guide them to help them integrate it back into normal life following their experience. And that is basically what that role delivers. But the hot debate is who can do that. And I think it's important that that there is a lot of debate about this, because we have to consider, if we're going to move forward into general healthcare, we're going to need to be conscious of legal and regulatory and even political frameworks when we consider who is going to do this, because there will be a lot of responsibility on, providing this type of therapy, which it is. And then it comes down to exactly what is therapy. And therapy is really just about, we tend to refer to therapists, psychotherapists, when we speak about therapy, but actually that's a huge term. Therapy is just really about providing care and support to a patient in a clinical setting by a healthcare professional, so to maximize that particular patient's well-being. Now, that can be provided, in my personal view, by a variety of different healthcare professionals, but I understand at the moment why there is a cautious approach to this because of what I've just described. There is a legal implication, there's a lot of taboo around these drugs, and the FDA and probably the MHRA are very, very cautious about whether they regulate them or not. So coming back to standards and moving forward in the healthcare settings that we know in the UK, certainly the NHS, I think we again will need to come up with a set of standards about who does this. And I think that coming back to, well, from my background in nursing, I mean, I know as a nurse, I'm trained to take care, to be able to observe medical, physical, psychological, and social aspects of my patients. So it's been very easy for me as a nurse to translate that training into this type of work. And I think that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to personal characteristics, first of all, that shouldn't be denied. Like many therapists, nurses, and psychologists, or even other types of therapists who are healthcare professionals anyway, that have been trained and certified to do any kind of healthcare work, should have certain characteristics about them that can deliver this type of work. So, it's down to basic things like being very empathetic, being caring, having good interpersonal skills. So it's not always, it doesn't always mean that a therapist is going to be the exact right person to deliver this type of care, and doesn't always mean that a nurse will be. It depends on the capabilities and the characteristics of that person. But I do think it is important that we go down the healthcare professional route. Certainly people that are trained and certified. I know there's a whole side of things that, there's a lot of arguments about, well, shamans and, people involved in yoga and spiritual people can provide this. But I think from a regulatory and a legal point of view, we are going to need healthcare professionals who are licensed to practice. I know that many people do lean on the way of thinking about actual psychotherapists, but I personally don't think that whilst they are perfectly well equipped to deliver it, I don't think that it should be restricted only to that type of professional, because I think, as I say before, many people can deliver this type of work. So I think the important thing as well is to understand that we want these drugs to be non-directive in the way that they work. So by that means that we allow the patient, through preparation, to be able to completely give into the experience. We're there to manage them through it, and then hopefully they will be able to have some emotional breakthrough themselves and gain insights, and that's what comes in integration. So the whole idea of being a psychedelic assisted therapist is not actually to provide psychotherapy, but to guide that patient through that whole journey from start to finish. And for that, it's that is open to and that's how they have the best healing of all, is if they're allowed to do that themselves, and they feel empowered as a result of that. That's been in my experience when they've gained these insights themselves. So all in all, who can be a psychedelic assisted therapist? I think it does need to be a healthcare professional moving into the real world. But I think there's a variety of people who are well equipped in that area to provide this type of work.
I've got a couple of questions, and I'll let Katie kind of come in here as well. We talked about keeping it standardization. All psychedelics, the different psychedelics have a different different, everybody has a different challenging experience. Are we saying that we need a particular therapist for somebody on DMT, on psilocybin, on LSD? Do you want to just explore that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, shall I go with that first? So I don't think so. I think coming back to Katie's point, once we've standardized it, the most important thing is preparation. I think the main part of this whole thing, which is set, is preparation of the patient, and making sure they understand exactly what they're going to experience. Well, they actually don't know exactly what they're going to experience, but they're prepared for any of the potential experiences, and that they understand they've built a rapport and they feel that they're in a safe and trusting environment. After that, it does not matter, because you manage every challenging experience, whether it's on DMT, whether it's on LSD, or whether it's on MDMA, in exactly the same way. And you've practiced that and rehearsed it ahead of time on how you're going to manage those experiences. So it makes no difference between those drugs, in my personal view.
Okay, well, one just very quick question again before Katie comes in. Again, it's about standardization. Yeah, thanks very much for you saying that we treat everybody the same on whatever psychedelic they are. What about the disease? I mean, do we treat somebody with PTSD different to somebody that's got anxiety, that somebody's got depression? Or again, do we just standardize what we do?
Yeah, I mean, there are different models with this. Sometimes, with different types of therapeutic areas, for example, you might want to have the patient focus on some of their symptoms and bring that particular symptom into the experience. And that can be quite valuable because, for example, if you're dealing with a patient with depression, you might want to have them think about some of the worst aspects of their depression so that they can have some structure to that particular experience. And maybe with a patient with PTSD, you might want to have them focus a little bit on some of the most difficult parts of their trauma. And for a patient with social anxiety, again, the same thing. But that's just the approach that you might want to sort of make at the very beginning, but actually going through the experience and the integration afterwards would be the same.
Okay, thank you. Katie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with what Bev said. I think, like I said, we have our standardization for our setting training, but we may change the approach depending on possibly the compound, but definitely compared to decondition, like Bev said. In looks of depression, we talk about the symptoms of depression, and we look at PTSD, it may be trauma. If we look at social anxiety, it may be the likes of safety behaviours. That's when we can start to differ our approaches, but the general standardization of the training would be the same.
One last question before we move on is, Bev and Katie, these sessions, if you want to call them, last for many hours as well. We've seen people with DMT come out of their experience very quickly. We've seen people on MDMA have a different type of experience that takes longer, and psilocybin as well. So just a quick comment on that, on the length of the session, basically.
Yeah, I think the sessions can differ, can't they, Bev? But again, it depends on the compounds. We look at the likes of DMT, and then we look at the 5-MeO DMT, that is very fast acting. Then we look at the likes of LSD, which is longer acting, which we're looking 6+ hours. So it can depend. Again, that's all part of training, and depending, again, you've got your standardization, but then we look at these compounds, and if the effects are going on longer, the standardization of training is still kind of the same, it's just prolonged.
Understood. Okay, thanks. I'm looking at the time because I do want to go to the Q&A. Katie, for you, do we give everybody psychedelics? Can all patients be treated with psychedelics?
I think there's definitely some vulnerable patients who are not suited to psychedelic treatment. We know that psychedelics can impact both physiological and emotional responses. So just on patients who maybe are at high risk, too vulnerable, we're looking at patients with the likes of schizophrenia, psychotic disorders. We know that the psychedelics can give the possibility of triggering psychotic episodes. Then we look at the likes of bipolar disorders as well, risk of emotional dysregulation, patients with high suicidal ideation as well. So we've got the risk of worsening symptoms. We've got cardiovascular, such as high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, stroke. Then we've got the likes of our standard where we look at pregnancy, patients prone to epilepsy or seizures. And then I think we look at how do we screen our patients to know that these high-risk patients aren't being dosed. And we look from clinical research. We use our scales, don't we? So you've got the likes of the mini mental exam, you've got the likes of the MADRS, the HAM-D, the CSSRS, and we look at who administers these. So yes, it can be a physician, but it's also our clinical raters. And you look at what a clinical rater does. And a clinical rater is a staff member who, yes, is able to follow a rating scale, but is also able to decipher between not only modules and questions, but also different disorders and what the questions are asking within them, and to understand if a participant is suitable candidate for taking a psychedelic drug. And if we think of a healthcare setting, I think we won't have that study-specific protocol to go by. We won't have these specific scales. So then we look at what scales are we going to standardize to use across all board then to determine eligibility. And again, it goes back to the standardization of treatment. Who are we going to use? Do we need psychiatrists? Do we need physicians to administer these scales? I would say no. I think, again, we're looking to healthcare professionals, people who are trained, people who are able to be what we call clinical raters, who are able to decipher between these questions. It could also be the likes of a psychedelic-assisted therapist. Are we looking at dual roles? Blinding is no longer a problem when we go through. Are they able to then, at screening, look through and determine eligibility? And then if we need, are we able to use our physicians? Again, I think it is going to depend on licensing and potential education requirements and depend on regulations as well.
Katie, you mentioned something very important there. In our clinical trials, we use many scales. You know, the SDI, the subjective drug intensity. We use the challenging, the mystical experience on that. So I think we need to decide what are those scales going to be, you know, because we can't use all those scales in the setting as well. You know, what are the best scales? And are the scales different for different psychedelics as well? So that's another kind of question there. So just a brief comment on that, and then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, I don't think we need to use different scales. Again, I think we can do it above board, use our standard scales. In research, we use the likes of the MINI, the MADRS, the HAM-D, and the CSSRS as our safety scales. I think that for eligibility, keep that as a standard. What our intensity rating is to be used during the experience, there's various ones we can use. A specific one in regard to level of intensity doesn't need to be any difficult, just so we can monitor the participant's level of intensity from baseline throughout, and then when they're coming back down as well. I think that's all we need.
Okay. Well, that leads us nicely into you know, the intensity of the experience, and then when is it safe to release the participant, the patient, from the clinic? Yeah, that's a big one. So when do we release them? Yeah. I don't mean really release them, but you know, when do they get discharged to go home?
Yeah. And there's two aspects to dischargeability, really, and there's two. The one is when are they safe to be released from the drug experience, and when are they safe to be released from the facility, whichever facility that will be in the future. You know, that there's two decisions to be made there. But both of them are looking at really whether the patient is whether the stability is related to the clinical aspects, the psychological and the social stability, whether all of those aspects of them are intact, you know, before you actually make the decision. And who can make the decision? Well, I think it needs to be a variety of people looking at it from different aspects. Certainly, I think from the medical side of things, we need to be assessing whether the cardiovascular status, the vital signs, and also one of the big things that we need to be aware of, and we will need to be aware of in the healthcare settings, is serotonin syndrome. So, you know, you need to be mindful of that. These are some of the side effects that can occur from these drugs. So we need to make sure that the people who are making the decisions for release are trained and capable of observing and understanding what those things are. So there is an aspect of medical decision making, whether that needs to come specifically from a medic. Yes, it's helpful, but I think certainly nurses are trained along those lines. So I can see a situation where, you know, nurses are able to make those types of decisions. From a psychological point of view, I think this release from the drug experience, you need to really understand whether the patient has come back to baseline. Now, I actually, I'm very cautious about using that idea of coming back to baseline because baseline may look very different to that participant following their drug experience. So they might actually, to try to wait until they get actually back to baseline the way they were before, may be not possible because they may have somewhat changed in a variety of different ways. And there may be a lot of afterglow, from these drugs where they're feeling quite elated and quite happy. And that's actually a desirable thing. So it's about really understanding whether the patient is orientated, do they know who they are, where they are, have many of the strong effects of the drug, like hallucinations, etc., have they vanished, have they gone? Does the patient feel safe? And the way I tend to do that practically is I give them a variety of scenarios and say, how do you feel about if you were to go out now, out of this room and speak to people who you haven't seen before, maybe the general public, or you were to get into a taxi, or how would you feel in that situation? And just examine them from those types of points of view, to see how they manage those. And if they're saying, I feel really fearful, I don't want to leave this room just yet, then you get an indication of where they're at. So yeah, providing little scenarios is very helpful to understand where they're at psychologically. But then also from a physical sort of function aspect, I think, again, assessing them as to, whether they can follow instructions, if you give them instructions. So one of the things that I practically do as a therapist is I will say, okay, we're at the end of the session now. Let's put the lights on. Let's try to get recovered back to normal. Can you put your shoes on? Can you get dressed? And I watch them and observe them to see whether they're able to do those things, follow instructions and do everything, as they are. So I think moving forward into the general healthcare, I think it'd be quite easy to have like a basically discharge checklist at looking at those areas, because and then discharge from the facility will just be asking them if they got a safe place to go home to and people at home that they can support them.
I'm conscious of the time.
Me too.
We could continue talking. This is a good segue into the last question. In clinical trials, we do have people that have challenging experience. We do have people that don't come to baseline. We do have the ability to keep them overnight, just to make sure. I don't know if that translates. So my question, the last question is, well, then how long should the integration and follow-up after the dosing be? And I'll let both of you, Bev, you could lead that.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a brief one, really. All we know is what we've standardized so far in our experience. And I think that at this point, that is all we should use. I think it's quite thorough. I mean, I think the following day after release, I think it's good to check in with the patient from a safety point of view. How are you doing? Do you feel? How do you feel? Do you feel safe? Those kinds of questions. Then maybe a week later, they've integrated back into normal life. They've gone back to work. How are they feeling? Has there been any antidepressant effect? Are they functioning okay? Check in a week. So then, and then once after the week that they're integrated quite well, then I think, 3 months from that point, has this effect lasted or not? And, whether they're looking for a second dose or not. I think that's the pretty standard approach for that.
I think the question, and we'll have to move on. Sorry, Katie. The question here is, when do those occur? And it goes back to this durability of kind of effect and everything. And that I still scratch my head. And when does the second dose? Is it a one-dose wonder as well? Okay, look, we've spoken a lot. We've got lots of, I'm sure we've got lots of questions. We can debate each of these questions, for hours and hours and hours, etc. But what we're trying to do here is saying, what have we learned in our clinical trial setting? And these studies are operationally challenging to do. How can we translate that into everyday practice? Now, before we open up the Q&As, I just want to say, what is the future? What is the future of psychedelics? Obviously, there is going to be psychedelics available for us to use, and then there's new psychedelics, if you want to call them second class or third kind of reiteration. They're called neuroplastogens. Maybe the word psychedelic is removed, and we say these are neuroplastogens, and these neuroplastogens are non-hallucinogenic. That's another debate that we can have. Then we have AI, virtual reality, AI guided therapy. We have a computer guiding their therapy. And this is what I was talking about, is personalized psychedelic protocols. Do we have personalized psychedelic protocol for different therapy areas, different drugs? And of course, it's policy reform. Do we want to downgrade the psychedelics? And it's also public perception as well. These psychedelics are meant to go to the parties and you have a good time. So that's something we need to look at. So I'm going to stop there. And Claire, we've kind of concluded here. We'll run over time. We just may want to get a few questions. We can follow up with everybody's question. Okay. Thank you very much, Kate and Bev.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you, everybody. We do have a couple of questions come through.
Yeah,
and just
great.
to let everyone know that we will be disseminating a Q&A document as well via email after the webinar. So do send them through. First one, how do you see AI being integrated now or in the near future with psychedelic therapy? Dr. Vincent, you just mentioned this. What possible uses do you see with it, and what possible limitations or drawbacks do you see with integrating AI with psychedelic therapies?
That's a great question. I won't be able to answer in a few minutes, but I have written a paper on AI, which I'm going to psychedelic assisted therapy. Can AI, can virtual reality take over that? Can the VR, the virtual reality, the AI, be the psychedelic assisted therapy? That I don't know. Can we use these features inside? I just don't know. It's a great question. That is the future, because everywhere is going AI as well. I'll have to think about that, and I can write a response on what I feel that the value of virtual reality or AI in psychedelic studies. So I know it's a whiffly kind of answer, but it's a very good answer. And I'm not a kind of expert on virtual reality or AI, but I am looking into the role of these processes in psychedelic assisted therapy.
Thank you. Next question. To evaluate baseline in patients, can imaging tests such as EEG be used?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Bev and Katie, this is more up your street, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, we are using these techniques, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, Katie, you've got more experience with these than I, but I do know we are moving along those lines, certainly in our studies, looking at EEGs both during and after.
Yeah, just to follow on for that, like Bev said, we are doing them at the moment, whether it's done prior to baseline, whether it's done, which can be what we'd call the likes of day -1, whether it's during a dosing session and after. So it's how often that we do use them, if they're to be used at all, but we are currently doing that. So we're still researching that at the moment.
Yeah, just to add on that, Claire, that's a very important. We use EEGs to exclude people with any conditions like epilepsy. We're using techniques to look at, are there brain changes later on? Can we use that as a surrogate marker or a marker of either coming back to baseline or efficacy? So I think that's a great question. More to follow. Yeah.
Thank you. And next question, what are the practicalities of running studies between phase 1 and release of these drugs? Is set and setting scalable for clinical trials?
I think we discussed that. I'll leave it to my colleagues, Kate and Bev, to answer that.
Yeah, I think
And that's what I was, sorry to interrupt. That's what I was thinking. Can we scale? Can we replicate that in everyday practice? Yeah.
I think so. As Sam, I think it's something we can do. We go back to the likes of is it going to be treatment centres? And again, is that going to help with the resources of the likes of hospitals and the likes of NHS? We have learned a lot over the last couple of years in regards to setting. So it's bringing that training and that experience that we've learned, standardising that and moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've covered the body of that. We've covered most of that in the body of our discussion today.
Thank you. Next question. How do you ensure that psychedelic therapies don't become overly commercialized as the field grows?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there could be restrictions. There could be some.
Yeah,
You only go to specialist centers to
yeah.
get that. You'll have to pass a certain screening criteria, etc. And
Yeah.
that's your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring all this out, aren't we? So it's hard to come up with a concrete answer on these things. But my worry, I think, is that these drugs, once the knowledge of how they actually do help as a form of treatment, may branch into just recreational use. People using them ad hoc. It comes back to like really promoting the idea of using them in with certified people in a safe setting, in a clinical setting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're still speaking about this in a whole variety of different ways.
Yeah, very good. Katie, anything to add to that?
Same as what Bev said, I think we're still trying to work it out at the moment, and I think it all depends of when approvals happen, when regulations happen, and I think we're going to go through different stages, aren't we, of where they're going to be used and when they're going to be used, and then we'll kind of see where they go from there.
Thank you. Next question. In terms of eligibility, how long should the screening be before the dosing? Is it better that the scale, albeit the HAM-D, CSSRS or MADRS, is administered, allowing sufficient time for a participant to return to a happier baseline to allow a better set and make them potentially more receptive to treatment? Nice question.
Yeah,
That's
good
what
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, typically the way we've conducted it so far in clinical trials is pretty standard, isn't it? That you give the patient the information approximately 1 month before, and you do kind of eligibility assessments in terms of those scales that you've just described to make sure that they're, going to be suitable for the trial. And then you do give them a period of time to get used to the information that you provided them with. But then typically the week before they dose, I think is the right time to start the preparation of them for their dose the following week. Because if it's too short, it's not enough time, and if it's longer than that, there's too much time elapsed between. You have to have a relationship with the patient, and if too much time elapses, then that gets broken a little bit. So I think classically the way we've done it so far is good. Like, inform the patient a month before, speak to them in the preparation for the whole journey a week before dosing, allow them time to absorb, get all their education on board, and then dose. So yeah, that's the time frame I think works really well.
Very nice. That was our last question. As we only have 2 minutes left, I don't think we have any time for any others, but I would like to give everyone a really big thank you. Fantastic questions, fantastic participation, excellent panel, really good discussion. Any final words from any of you?
I think this is like Bev, and we're learning. We're learning. There's a counterculture around psychedelics. There's a kind of a regulatory. There's a government policy around these Schedule 1 licenses, etc. So we're learning, and this is the question I keep asking. I have this debate: is can we translate what we do in clinical trials into clinical practice? It's a tough question. I think we're just touching the surface of this, and I think it requires more discussion, more debate. Will the payers, would Medicare or the NHS or the Europe, pay for this service? Because that's where it's going to be. My last question is around the therapist as well. What we do in clinical trials, we always introduce the patient to a therapist, just in case one therapist can't turn up as well. So they're not saying, "Oh, who are you? I've not met you as well." So there are challenges, and I think it's important to have the discussions, because the pharma companies that are heading towards getting licenses, maybe they're thinking about it, maybe they're not. I don't know. I've not seen these kind of debates happening as well. So it's good to have this kind of a discussion and a kind of a think tank. And all I can say is we're learning, We haven't got the answers. These are just our personal experience. Bev?
Yeah, my final point is, Katie and I have been at the coalface really here, and we see the significant changes that these drugs can make to people's lives. And I think that, those people are going to go out and tell two people, and they're going to tell two people. And I don't think that this can be ignored anymore. So I think this whole topic is going to have to be addressed politically, legally, and from the clinical and medical forums, because that it's just too significant to ignore.
Yeah. Katie, final comment before we shut.
I agree with both your comments. Like you've said, we are still learning. However, we have came a long way with a lot of lessons learned that have been had. And again, like what you said, Bev, we've been very lucky to be at the forefront of it all. And there's no ignoring what we've seen. It's been amazing.
I just want to leave you with one little anecdote. When somebody approached me about psychedelics, I said, "How do you start psychedelics?" That's the naivety we had back in 2017. Now we've come a long way, which is really
now we can spell it.
The neuroplastogens, all of these neural circuitry, we're still learning, And my final comment before we shut short: do we need to have the hallucinogenic experience to have efficacy? That'd be a great debate for another day.
Yeah, who knows?
Much so.
Who knows?
Thank you ever so much. Thank you for joining our event today. You can see on the screen, if you'd like to follow us on our social channels, there's where to go. We will be holding more of these webinars. Do please look out for them. Thank you, everybody.